Tangled in Tuscany. Chapter 28. Home in Tuscany. The courtyard was alive the moment they pulled in. Tractors rumbling somewhere beyond the olive trees. Crates of grapes stacked in uneven towers along the wall. The air thick with the sweet tang of fermentation. Workers moved in purposeful lines, their boots scuffing over the stone, arms full of deep purple clusters still cool from the morning. Voices overlapped in a lively rhythm. Italian spilling fast and bright, with Chiara's laughter threading through it, all like the chorus of a familiar song. Sophia stepped out of the car, the late afternoon sun striking her face, and felt dust curl around her ankles as the courtyard seemed to expand around her. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this. The grounded weight of the earth beneath her, the hum of industry that wasn't sterile or mechanical, but human and alive. Her pulse matched the heartbeat of the place before she even knew it. She didn't need to search for her place here, her body already remembered. Luca closed his door more slowly, his eyes fixed not on the harvest bustle, but on her. It wasn't a look that asked for anything. It was the quiet gaze of someone who had already decided she belonged. When her eyes met his expression didn't change, just deepened, as if he were storing this moment for later. Before they moved toward the house, he touched her elbow lightly, a brief anchor amid the noise. The gesture wasn't rushed, but it kept her beside him, holding her in that thin slice of stillness between arrival and immersion. "It's good to see it like this again, isn't it?" His voice was low, almost conspiratorial, as though the courtyard's rhythm might overhear and lay claim to her before he'd finished saying the words. Sophia glanced around, the crates, the laughter, the glint of sun on glass demijohns lined up by the shed, and nodded. "Yes," she said simply, but the word carried more than agreement. A small smile tugged at her mouth, unforced, the kind that came from recognition rather than novelty. The harvest wasn't just busy, it was intoxicating. There was a pulse in it, an unbroken thread from the roots in the soil to the hands that picked, sorted, and pressed the fruit, and she could feel it again, thrumming in her chest like it had never left. She took another breath, the scent of crushed grapes mingling with the faint smoke of a wood fire somewhere in the distance, and realized that this wasn't just returning. It was stepping back into something that had been waiting for her all along. Luca's hand fell away from her arm, but the warmth of his touch stayed. Without another word, they started toward the main house, their pace unhurried despite the swirl of activity around them. The noise of the courtyard faded just slightly with each step, but the energy clung to her skin. It was like the whole vineyard had inhaled at her arrival, and she couldn't quite shake the sense that it had exhaled in welcome. Inside, the shift was immediate. The thick hum of the harvest gave way to the cooler hush of stone walls and shaded halls. The air touched with the scent of oak beams and crushed fruit lingering from the cellar below. Sophia's steps slowed as they passed the familiar guesthouse door, its worn brass handle catching a slice of light from the window. She half expected him to stop there, but Luca didn't break stride. He led her up the stairs, his pace steady, as if there had never been a question about where she was going. At the top, the hall stretched in muted light, a spill of late sun filtering through the far window. He stopped at a door she recognized, not from ever having entered it, but from imagining. He reached into his pocket, the faint jingle of metal breaking the silence, and placed something cool and solid in her palm. She looked down, a brass key, smooth from years of use. It was heavier than she expected, its weight pressing against her skin like it knew its place there. "You won't be needing the guest house anymore," he said. No smile, no flourish. Just the words, spare and unembellished, carrying more permanence than any declaration could. Her fingers curled around the key, feeling its edges dig into her palm. It was both a gesture and a statement. A door opened without the need for conditions. She didn't speak, but when she met his eyes, something unspoken settled between them, warm and certain. Down the hall, the sound of quick footsteps broke the moment. Chiara appeared. wiping her hands on her apron, a faint blush of exertion in her cheeks from the crush of the day's work. She stopped short, her gaze flicking from Sophia's face to the key. A slow grin spread across her face, knowing bright, but she didn't say anything. No teasing, no grand reaction, just that smile. And then she turned and disappeared back toward the stairs, her humming already echoing down the corridor. Sophia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, still feeling the outline of the key against her skin. A moment later, Alessia appeared coming up from the opposite end of the hall, carrying a small stack of folded linens. She slowed as she passed, her sharp eyes taking in the space between them, the faint shine of brass in Sophia's hand. There was the briefest flicker of a smile before she gave a small, approving nod, a quiet blessing in motion, then continued on without a word. It wasn't dramatic, this exchange. There were no congratulations, no whispered jokes, just a quiet, matter-of-fact acceptance, as if the decision had been inevitable, and the only thing left was to carry on. Sophia stood at the threshold of the room, the key still warm from her grip, and thought, not for the first time, that sometimes the smallest moments carried the deepest gravity. The door clicked softly behind them as they stepped into Luca's room. Afternoon light spilled in through an open window, the air carrying that unmistakable blend of sun-warmed vines, faint oak, and the earth's quiet after a long day's work. The vineyard stretched in neat, sunlit rows beyond the glass, their rhythm so familiar she could almost feel the soil beneath her boots. She set her bag down beside a low chest, the weight of it landing with a muffled thud against the wood floor. There was a shift in the air she couldn't quite name, subtle, but impossible to ignore. This wasn't the impersonal comfort of the guest house, where her things had always been arranged with one eye on departure. This was lived-in space, a place with history folded into its corners. And now, without question, it was where she belonged. She glanced at Luca, finding his gaze steady, unreadable in that way he had when he wanted her to see only what was essential. But this time, she caught more. A quiet certainty, the kind that didn't need to be announced. The unspoken truth between them was clear. She wasn't just staying here, she was staying. Her fingers grazed the brass key in her pocket, and for a moment, she thought about all the doors in her life that had only ever been half open. This one wasn't. By late afternoon, the hum of harvest began to fade, the steady clatter of crates and low murmur of voices giving way to the quieter rhythms of evening. Workers drifted away in twos and threes, their laughter carrying faintly through the courtyard. Somewhere beyond the house, a tractor coughed its last engine note for the day. Light poured in through the half-open shutters, laying long amber streaks across the floorboards. Outside, the air shifted toward evening coolness, touched with the scent of wood smoke from a distant fire and the lingering sweetness of crushed grapes. Sophia leaned against the window frame, elbows resting on the sill. Below, the vines swayed gently, their leaves catching the light like small, moving mirrors. She let her eyes follow the rows until they blurred into the far edge of the property, where hills began to roll upward. Footsteps sounded softly behind her, and then Luca was there, his presence settling beside hers without fanfare. He rested a shoulder against the same frame, their arms brushing just enough for the warmth to pass between them. Neither shifted away. They didn't speak at first. The quiet between them wasn't about avoiding words, it was about not needing them. The day's work still clung to him, a faint trace of dust in his hair, the scent of the fields lingering in his shirt. She inhaled deeply, as if memorizing it. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching. The whole vineyard bathed in that fleeting gold that seemed to last only minutes before surrendering to dusk. She felt him glance at her, but she kept her gaze on the vines, afraid that if she met his eyes in this light, she might forget every careful step they'd taken to get here. And yet, even without looking, she knew, he wasn't thinking about the harvest just now. They moved around each other in an unhurried rhythm, the kind that felt more like settling into a shared life than simply arranging a room. Luca's suitcase gave a soft thump as he placed it by the wardrobe, his hand absently smoothing the worn leather before unfastening the buckles. She folded his shirts into neat stacks, pausing occasionally to breathe in the faint scent of the vineyard that clung to the fabric. It was as if the air itself had traveled with them, settling now into this space the way dust settles after a harvest, quietly, without asking permission. Her own belongings found their places with the same deliberate ease. A sweater draped over the back of the chair. Camera gear lined up on the desk, lenses gleaming faintly in the low light. The brass key rested in the center of the table, as if it belonged there all along. Neither of them spoke much. It wasn't silence out of caution or awkwardness, but the kind born from knowing you're in the middle of something worth protecting. Each movement, a drawer sliding closed, a zipper whispering open, seemed to deepen the sense that this room was no longer just his. When she reached for the last item in her bag, a small stack of books bound with a piece of twine, her fingers brushed against the folded corner of an old receipt tucked between the pages. It was from the cafe in Florence, where she'd written part of the letter. For a second, the memory tightened her chest, but when she looked up, Luca was there, tucking a pair of socks into the drawer like this moment was the only one that mattered. And maybe it was. She carried the books to the shelf beneath the window, untying the twine and setting each one down carefully. Travel guides she had long since stopped opening, a slim poetry collection she'd found in Siena, the worn notebook where she kept fragments of ideas, bits of sentences, the beginnings of photographs that didn't yet exist. The room felt different with each placement, less like a space she'd been invited into, and more like one she was helping shape. She turned at last to her portfolio case, the zipper sound loud in the mellow hush. Pulling out the final book, a heavy volume of photography, she slid it into the remaining space on the shelf. It fit perfectly, the spine flush with the others. She stepped back, exhaling slowly. "This time," she said, her voice so low it might have been to herself, "I unpacked everything." The words hovered between them for a moment, not demanding a reply, but somehow filling the air more than anything else could have. She wasn't talking about clothes or books or even camera gear. She was talking about the part of herself she had always kept half-packed, ready to leave before she could be left. Luca, standing by the wardrobe, glanced at her then, not quickly, not in surprise, but with the kind of steady attention that made her feel entirely seen. He crossed the room, his steps unhurried, and leaned one hand on the edge of the shelf beside her. "Good," he said simply, and it carried the weight of 100 other things he didn't need to name. For a long moment, they just stood there in the amber light spilling in from the window, the vineyard stretching beyond like an unspoken promise. She felt the faint brush of his arm against hers, not accidental, not urgent, just there. The kind of touch you don't move away from. Outside, the last notes of the harvest day faded, replaced by the hum of crickets and the occasional murmur of voices in the courtyard. She felt it all. The day's warmth still in the walls, the scent of wood smoke creeping in, the grounded steadiness of knowing she wasn't going anywhere. When he reached past her to close the shutter halfway, the air shifted, cooler now, but the room felt no less warm. They didn't speak again, but neither of them needed to. The quiet was full,